Hi everyone, welcome back to the show. Today we are set to speak about operational efficiency, about the back office world, as well as all the work around asynchronous work. Join me and Nathan Stearns, Vice President of WFO Product Strategy at NICE, as we explore the paths and avenues into this world. Let's go. This episode is sponsored by NICE, leading customer experience platform, but more on that later.
Welcome, welcome one more time. Nathan, how are you doing? Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. It's good to be here.
Good to have you. So let me start with a brief about you. You have a huge tenure within the industry. You have been with Nice Systems for a long time. I think you saw probably all the evolutions and the faces of the WFM in the last decades. I wanted to start there, like how much are we in fact evolving versus how much are we just adapting? And what's your take on how your journey is connected with an industry in your professional journey?
So adapting versus evolving, that's a that's an interesting way to put it. So a little bit of my background, just real quick. I've been with NICE for 27 years. This is actually my 28th year. That includes my time at IEX, which is a company NICE acquired back in 2006.
Mhm.
Prior to that, I worked 10 years at Sprint Telecommunications, which is now T-Mobile. And while I was at Sprint, I managed a workforce management team and a call traffic management team for 8 contact centers. So I've been in the world of WFM for quite a while. Um, and we have seen a lot of evolution and adapting, and it kind of goes in cycles. I remember one of the evolutions that the industry went through is when the ACDs brought out skill-based routing. It really disrupted things from a workforce management perspective because no longer could you plan on a person just spending their time on one piece of work or one type of work. We now had to figure out how to plan and spread that person across multiple skills or queues or whatever the ACD called it. So that was an example of an evolution, or maybe some people would call a revolution because it was so different. And then we kind of went into a period of I would say adapting. We continued to add feature functionality. We worked with customers to understand, what the trends were, what the business needs were. We saw kind of a move to more employee engagement. We saw a move to a focus on forecast accuracy. So it's kind of adapted as we've seen customers change their focus from maybe one particular area to another. I think right now we are back into a phase of evolution because, and I hate to put so much on COVID and the pandemic, but that was a very big disruptor. It caused a lot of our customers to have to rethink pretty much everything about how to do contact centers and back office operations. It introduced new channels that really were just things we kind of toyed with on the side, or we tried some things, but all of a sudden live chat, asynchronous chat, SMS, all of these digital ways of meeting and connecting with customers started coming to the forefront, and the volumes really started mushrooming, which again put another pressure on all things workforce management because those asynchronous modes of communication don't work well with the traditional workforce management algorithms and processes. It's kind of like the disruptor we saw with skill-based routing. These digital channels and having to think about asynchronous, non-contiguous conversations is a similar disruptor of what we saw 20 plus
Mhm.
years ago when skill-based routing came out. So I think we're in a process or a phase of significant evolution of the workforce management processes.
Do you? So we were together a few weeks ago, a few days ago at SWPP. You had a talk about the operational efficiency on the back office side of back office operations. I wanted to ask. So when you compare the evolution that you mentioned with the ACD to where it was now, do you feel it is having the same? So was that evolution as impactful on the customer or the end customer, the person that is trying to engage with the contact center, as much as the person that is on the WFM or on the CX world compared to now? Like, do you feel like, because what I guess is now it's an evolution or revolution happening on both ends at the same time. While before the customer was still calling probably more or less the same way, but was not as disruptive. While now it's just a variety of channels, and you mentioned this a bit on back office operations. There is a lot of points of interaction that is evolving how we the data we have and how we actually provide service. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, the question of how to understand efficiencies and effectiveness have been long under the purview of the contact center. I mean, we kind of live and and die by productivity measures, and it's just become part of our natural lingo, our natural processes. That's not to say that back office teams haven't also been concerned with it, but some of the intensity or focus on it has traditionally been a bit different from a back office perspective. I think what we're seeing is when the contact center had to figure out how to deal with asynchronous channels and how to understand, well, if I put multiple concurrent interactions on a person, what does that do to their productivity, their effectiveness, their quality? That started creating questions in the contact center realm that actually have a natural application to the back office arena, because we took the contact center people that are very focused and understanding how to use numbers to manage by, started applying them to these new kinds of interactions, and they're figuring it out, to great success. The natural evolution is, well, if we can figure out how to manage effectively these asynchronous digital channels in the contact center, why not take those practices and those management philosophies and the data acquisition and interrogation and driving insights into the back office? Because the nature of the work is very similar. It's asynchronous, it's non-contiguous. A person could be working multiple interactions simultaneously in the back office. So why not start bridging the two organizations and help both work toward a common understanding, common lingo, common practices around
Mhm.
how to understand who's being efficient, who's being effective, what do you need to understand that. The data sources, and that's a whole nother conversation, the data sources have actually been the bigger challenge, not necessarily the management practices of the back office versus front office, because I think there's a lot of transferable insight and skills between the two organizations.
Mhm.
I think the back office, the bigger challenge there is just getting the data to manage by.
And let me take on what you just said. And I remember in the back at SWPP, you mentioned a few data pools you had in terms of like, and you did a few live on back office operation size and front office and who was using what. I wanted to ask that shift towards the asynchronous work. What are the actual challenges it presents to the technology we have today and to how we operate today?
So, wow, there's several different different angles we could take on it. Let me first start with the most prevalent challenge, and that is,
Mhm.
if we think about a traditional contact center being a voice call, there's a recognizable start of a call and an end of a call. And you can get some insight during the course of that call, whether the employee put the customer on hold, there's some after call work time that was probably used. But all in all, it's a pretty nice package of information we have about that piece of work. And we can drive productivity measures off of that. We can use it for forecasting, planning, et cetera. The challenge that asynchronous work brings to the WFM process is, because of the nature of a piece of work actually having these embedded pauses in it, meaning if I'm on a chat or an SMS, I get something from the customer, I process it, but I need something else from the customer, so I send an outbound message. Well, now me as an agent, me as an employee, I'm sitting there waiting, doing nothing. So what our customers are realizing is, oh, to be more efficient and effective, I can attach a second piece of work to this person and let them work on that while they're waiting for the incoming message on that other piece of work. That concept, that concurrency concept, is what is driving so many challenges and problems in workforce management, because the first question is, what is the measure of a piece of work? If you look at it from the customer perspective, it does, the handle time does actually include all of the time it took, including just the sitting and waiting time, because that's from the eyes of the customer.
Yes.
But from a business perspective, what we really need to understand is, well, what's the work effort that a person is putting into each piece of work? So you hear us talk in terms of what is the in focus handle time versus the elapsed handle time. The elapsed handle time is a perspective from the customer. The in focus handle time is a perspective for workforce planning, because we really need to understand the work effort that went into a piece of work. So one of the challenges we have is separating the two conversations. They're both important to understand, but for workforce management, we need to zero in on the work effort. And that's why we've been re-engineering our WFM system to look at things through a new lens, a new paradigm. We call it true to interval. That concept in and of itself is not necessarily new, but the way we're using the data that's driven off of a true to interval analytic analysis of these interactions, the way we use that in workforce management, that's what's new, because we're no longer just thinking about work as a single widget that starts in one interval and continues on through multiple intervals. We now actually have insight and can understand that for some of this work stuff, there could be 15, 30 minutes, hour delay between an outbound message and an inbound message. So it's been interesting to understand the nature of the work and then re-engineer both the data acquisition and the workforce management processes to think in terms of work effort rather than just widget counting, if that makes sense.
It makes sense, and let me stop you there, because I think you mentioned a few things that are by itself already. We can speak hours about it. So, the first one is, I like the way you true to work, that concept of like almost an heartbeat. You consistently knowing exactly where we are spending time. That is, to a certain extent, very unique, very different. I can imagine the amount of challenges this entails in the background. And you mentioned the other part, which is some of the benefits that actually integrating that can lead to the contact center, to the back office operations. And that's what I wanted to tap for a bit, like
Mhm.
knowing exactly how you are spending your time, because traditionally you have two major variables, is volume and time. You work to the efficiency of volume, that combined gives you the actual throughput, cost, people, etc. How how do you quantify the benefits of really understanding what that asynchronous work and how to properly understand it means to the back office operations, and in this case to the service operations in general?
Yeah, it's a great question. So let me start by an observation, and that observation is most enterprises that have both a front office or traditional contact center and a back office operation have typically operated those in silos, meaning there's no concept of sharing work or people across those two organizations. Now, that concept, that philosophy embeds in it a known inefficiency, because you know in a contact center you have periods of idle time. You don't have enough work to keep your agents busy. And the same can hold true in the back office. You don't have enough work to keep your back office employees busy. Or it could be the inverse. You could have way too much work in the contact center and not enough capacity to handle it. Same in the back office. So what we're seeing our customers coming to us with is saying, okay, we operate as an enterprise. There's a bottom line P&L that we're trying to drive to, and we have a sense that there is an opportunity to gain some efficiencies if we could bring these two dissimilar work streams and figure out how to interweave them so that we can take advantage of the peaks and valleys of both environments in a more informed and planned perspective. That's how you gain some new economies of scale and efficiencies. It's very similar. Again, I go back to what we already know. Skill-based routing, it came about because it allows you to use a person across multiple skills based on where the peaks and valleys are for those multiple skills. Pandemic extended that concept to digital channels, meaning if I'm a contact center agent handling voice calls, if there's an influx of chat needs, I can actually peel a person off of the voice call and give them a chat to work on. So we're already interweaving digital channels with voice channels. Well, back office work interweaving with traditional contact center work is just in my perspective, it's another natural evolution of what we've been seeing happen.
Mhm.
But again, it requires a different way of looking at the data so you can actually interweave it, because the contact center is not going to give up their 15 or 30-minute planning perspective. They live and die by that because their work needs immediate attention.
Yeah.
The back office team doesn't need that level of granularity. They're typically focused on what does my day look like or what does my week look like. So we have to find a way to decompose or deconstruct the back office work that is at a higher time grain into the lowest common denominator, which is the contact center 15 or 30-minute increment perspective, so that we can then help our customers interweave the work across the entire enterprise to take advantage of the idle time, the peaks and valleys, and start sharing these resources as more one cohesive work unit. They still have their own objectives, their own
Mhm.
processes, their own needs, but when we actually are able to deconstruct and really understand the work effort in both environments and meld those together, it creates a whole new paradigm, a whole new perspective on how we can help our customers become even more efficient and effective.
And
And by
and
the
I
way,
think
you can get into all kinds of conversations about employee engagement because it provides wonderful job variety to
yeah.
work toward agent retention, employee retention. So it has all kinds of, downstream impacts.
And now a word to our sponsor, NICE. It's never been easier for organizations of all sizes around the globe to create extraordinary customer experiences while meeting their key business metrics. Featuring cloud native customer experience platforms CX1, NICE is a world leader in AI powered self service and agent assisted CX software for the contact center. More than 2,000 customers and 2.7 million users rely on NICE Workforce Management, the market leading solution. NICE WFM enables the contact center leaders to make smarter decisions about every aspect of staff planning and management. Back to the episode.
Yeah, I can see all the doors it opens. The way you were saying, and one concept that it's very present to me, and I think to multiple people that might be listening, is many times when you look at the traditional contact center, you look at an availability game. You need to be available, and that is costly most times because you need to be available like short, immediate, react, very active time. When you look at more back office operations, it's a game of capacity and it's
Mhm.
efficiency on that maximizing those resources because it's not necessarily being totally available. It's like it's going with the flow, but making sure you are taking advantage of your resources to the best possible way. And that you mentioned this touches on this last mile of blending the contact center with the back office work and world. Uh, and you mentioned a bit on how the definition of that works, but you mentioned the data struggles, and I wanted to touch a bit about on that on the technology side, like what is actually needed for tools for the data to flow to effectively you can blend and know exactly what's happening. Can you briefly give us, like, without going super technical, what is actually required to be able to do that blend?
Sure. And by the way, you are 100% correct that the perspectives are very different. The concept of availability versus capacity. But instead of looking at those as roadblocks, we are actually working with our customers and realizing that it's an opportunity because The back office work is generally deferrable, and you can tap into those resources to help with the periods where you have limited availability on the contact center and vice versa. So although they're
Creates new
very different,
dynamics, right?
yeah,
Creates new
if
dynamics.
yeah, they're different, but that difference actually creates an opportunity that we're trying to help our customers tap into. Now, to your point, the data side of it, we were talking with a customer yesterday, and there, I wouldn't say that the back office is lacking data. That's not necessarily the case. I think that the biggest challenge is the nature of the data is different than what we traditionally see in a contact center. For one thing, it's generally not at the granularity that we see and need for contact center planning. The back office typically, and I'm talking in generalizations, I realize that, but they typically think in terms of what is my inventory for today and how much of that's going to bleed over into tomorrow. It's what's happening at 8 o'clock on Monday is not as important as the kind of planning that we see in the contact center. So on the one hand, for the back office environment, we need information about the number of what I call widgets or work items. What is the backlog? What is the inventory? What's the age of the inventory? Um, what is the average time it takes to work a piece, an item out of inventory from start to finish so you can get it resolved? Those are more high level aggregated kind of numbers that most back office teams have insight to. Either they get it off of their work item routing platform like a Pega or Genesis or Zendesk. They have these ticket based systems that can provide some of this aggregated data, which is great. It helps us start the workforce planning process. What they typically are a bit lacking on are the insights on the agent productivity and the individual agent work effort that went into those tickets or cases or claims. And that's where you see the potential need for other kinds of technology. For instance, desktop analytics. It's one thing for the claim system or the ticket system to know when a ticket started and when it was closed. That ticketing system doesn't really know what all was going on during the course of the lifespan of that ticket. The desktop does, though. The desktop, because that's how the employee interacts with the claim or the ticket, the desktop knows all. It's kind of the individual ACD for that claim. And it can generate a massive amount of data that can then drive insights to help understand individual employee productivity, efficiency, quality.
Mhm.
So, and this is where it gets a little different than the contact center because you have to look at potentially different data sources to drive some of the insights. And we're working with many of our customers and helping them understand there's a place for your claims system, your ticketing system. There is a place for the desktop analytics, and it's going to generate information to help you drive things like performance management. And then we need to understand how can we get data that's deconstructed for this workforce management process. And it's primarily coming out of the claims system itself and deconstructing, not just looking at the start and end of a claim or ticket, but how much time was actually spent just waiting for a response. So the claim or ticket was in a pending state or an idle state. Typically, these systems know that, and that's what we're starting to work with our customers to get down to that level of granularity so that we can then start actually analyzing the work effort, not necessarily the individual screens that were used. That's part of your performance management questions. But for workforce management, we're looking at the things like productive time, idle time, pending time, that sort of thing, and then ingesting that into workforce management so that we can make better plans for what does your staffing need and how does
Mhm.
a piece of work that may last 2 weeks, and this is not an exaggeration, in some claims environment, a piece of work can have a lifespan of 2 weeks, but that is not 2 weeks of work effort. And that's where we're getting into a more granular view of really understanding what's happening almost at an interval by interval level so that we can then interweave it with the contact center work. That's a long response. I hope that answered
No,
your
yeah, I think
question.
you get it, and it's really that in and out, and the things that are like, even if it goes 2 weeks or more, it's not active all the times. And I think you touched on two concepts that are very familiar to everyone in WFM, which is utilization, occupancy, because you start really getting those numbers with a refinement that probably traditionally you weren't able to. I can only imagine the amount of data that needs to be manipulated and integrated for this to happen to this extent. Um, but I totally get it. It feels really, I could really understand the challenge, and I think the opportunity, like you framed it quite well, ahead, and continue to look ahead. Like when you look at what you just mentioned that you guys are working on, plus how the industry is evolving in terms of new channels and like those levels of data integration, is there any trends or specific trends that you feel like will shape specifically on the back office operations that you see that will change more dramatically how we are doing, or you feel like back to the evolution, as soon as we the evolution is already happening and we are reacting and trying to adapt?
As I mentioned earlier, I think we are in the middle of a evolution. I think one of the trends that we are starting to see as part of this is I don't know if it's a renewed focus, a new focus. I don't know really how to categorize it at this point, but it has to do with the actual management of the work associated with a task. So if you think about it, the ACD has been around a long time and it manages the work that comes into the ACD, it attaches it to the person, it manages the after call work state, et cetera. So the ACD is doing all it does to help manage a call, or in some cases, a chat, depending upon how you route it. But for some of these environments, like ticket-based systems, pure back office operations, the concept of actually having a workflow management system or process, that is what I think we're starting to see an evolution toward. So there are CRM systems and ticket-based systems that collect data about a claim or ticket or a case, but they don't necessarily manage the case or the claim as it goes through its processing. And when I say manage, I'm talking about um, you know, a piece of work may start with a particular perspective or business need, but as you get into it, it may actually spawn new things that need to occur or new elements that we need to get
Mm-hmm.
from the customer or new actions that the employee must take. So the concept of actually guiding a piece of work through to resolution, um, there's an opportunity to build in some scripting so that you help the employee be more effective. There's opportunity to actually engage the consumer or the customer proactively. So for instance, if you're getting a claim and it's through a system and there's additional information needed, you shouldn't necessarily have to engage a live person to make the contact with the consumer to provide that additional information. You can invoke a robot or something to make that contact, again, to bring automation into the overall workflow. There's a concept of what we call in-flight QA, meaning just like during a live call, if someone is doing a live monitoring, if they hear the agent going off the rails, they can intervene in a live
Mm-hmm.
manner. Well, that concept can actually exist in these back office environments. If someone in the overall processing of a claim or ticket is taking a wrong path or sending wrong information or incomplete information, you can actually capture that in flight and do an intervention before you actually have customer dissatisfaction. So this whole concept of managing the workflow, I think that's a thing that we're starting to see our customers evolve to. And it goes beyond just, I've got a ticket and it's starting and I watch until it ends and I can report on it. This is more about, how do I make the whole experience more automated, more effective, higher quality, in more of a real-time fashion? And that is, I think, a trend that we're starting to see. Does that help
And
answer your question?
it helps, and you brought to the table three things that I feel like that are super interesting, at least personally. One, you brought back to the concept of doing the best for the customer, like really making sure that the journey is as smooth as possible, remove friction, less touch points.
Hmm.
You brought the concept of robots, automation, RPA processes that can go along the back office, and you can do small throughout your flow, do small bits here and there that streamline back again your efficiency. And you also touched a bit on when you mentioned automation, and that is exactly the question I was going to ask. How do you frame all the automation slash AI slash machine learning into this ecosystem? And then you kind of unveiled how it connects, but I'm wondering, like, how, what do you see that will be the role in the future? Do you see more of these coming where parts of their journey get more automated, more assisted, or do you see something more than that?
No, I definitely think more automation and more intelligent, proactive automation is coming. I mean, we're hearing it primarily in the terms of what's coming and what's being delivered for the contact center. You know, the robots that assist, the co-pilot concept. Um, the this capabilities have applicability to the back office operations, because there's still there's still known opportunities for improvement. So it may be that we'll see improvements through automation to guide an employee to make sure they complete a predetermined checklist. And if there's a step missed, then there could be a proactive indicator and prompt to make that happen. You know, some of this is not necessarily AI based. It's more script or rules based. So you do have to kind of be careful on what you claim is AI versus more of, here's your checklist or rule to process. The AI component is more an approach to adding some intuition, trying to avoid some, you know, downstream negative impacts by understanding intent, sentiment, those kinds of things. And again, we do it well for the contact center. These back office operations, at, at the most base level, they are interactions. They have an essence of two or more people in a conversation. They're just over different channels or different methods and modes of communicating, but the communication is still going on. So I think what we'll see is a continued evolution of what, as we learn in the contact center, we'll start applying some of those learnings and capabilities across these different means of communication that are the primary ways of communicating in the back office. It doesn't have to be just based on voice. It can be based on text and you know, the way the information showing up on forms that may be filled out, that sort of thing. The other thing that's also interesting in the back office, and it has to do with the automation, we hear stories of, if the back office team starts getting behind, it starts generating calls to the contact center. Well, that is another area of opportunity to embed some automation in the back office, because if you know you're getting behind, the back office can actually start making proactive outbound contacts with customers just to touch base. You know, thank them for their patient, quick status update, your claim is in process, here's the step it's in. That kind of proactive communication, if you build it into your back office workflow, it can actually do call avoidance in your contact center. So again, there's a lot of things that we're starting to see some of our customers experiment with, as they realize that these two organizations, front office slash contact center and the back office, they've typically been viewed as silos, but in reality, there is a lot of coordinated effort and planning that can and should occur between the two sides of the organization.
Yeah. And I think that gives a huge opportunity not only for WFM in terms of service, but like you get the professionals to engage different dynamics in terms of like resource utilization and so on. I think it opens up actually a lot that is very interesting, even to plan for those automations and how you make sure that those are uh, taking the impact that you foresee. I wanted to ask you on everyone that is looking at their journey. They either have a back office team or small, big, or some kind of environment where they take advantage of the contact center and the back office. For someone that wants to start looking into that blending environment or just how to leverage and optimizing back office, what would be your recommendations for the first steps, as well as like what are the things that they should avoid doing to make sure that they don't go into that rabbit hole?
Get professional help would be um, and not on a personal level by that. I mean, work with your vendors to get some professional help to really understand, what technology is at your disposal. You may not have it in house yet, but there is a lot of technology available to help a back office team start uh, generating data, and that's kind of the first step is putting some things in place so that you can start creating data that you can drive some insights from. And you do have to know your technology and your vendor to know what they're capable of. I mentioned this concept of true to interval earlier. This is a pretty new concept. It is a different way of looking at the world. There's actually only one ACD right now that can do it out of the box, but I think it's going to start evolving to other ACDs, back office systems, CRM systems. So I think, going back to the conversation, we're in the midst of an evolution. So looking at your provider and asking them these pointed questions: what are your plans for helping me understand the true nature of work and work effort, and what's your vision, and what's your roadmap to help develop those insights. um, as far as the individual technology, I won't make this a sales pitch on the nice solutions, but there are a lot of things out there that you can start with. I think one of the questions you'll need to ask is, where's my vision, my immediate need? Is it trying to understand, am I getting a fair day's pay for, or fair day's work for a fair day's pay? And if that's your main question, then you're probably going to be looking at maybe not workforce management specific tools, but more performance management specific tools. Trying to understand if you're having some lost productivity time, and using that as your low hanging fruit to go develop some efficiencies. If your vision is a little more extensive and you actually want to start a journey of blending front office and back office, then desktop analytics might not be your first play. It may be you need to work with your back office CRM system or workflow management system and introduce these new paradigms of rethinking work so that we can deconstruct it and blend it in with your contact center work. And that's a whole different line of questions and consideration and working with your vendor. So, long answer to your question, it kind of depends on what the focus is and what do you want to tackle first. The good news is, from what we hear from our customers, you can start anywhere and and see some pretty quick ROI and benefit, because
Mhm.
just the mere fact that you're applying some attention to these environments will start some gains that just naturally happens as you have conversations and you start looking at data.
So I think you gave a great advice, Nathan. Just to wrap up for today, what will be your message to the audience, regardless where they are in the journey? What will be your final thoughts?
Hang in there. You mentioned SWPP. I think you and I probably both sat in on some of the sessions, and I think there's still more questions than answers.
Mhm.
I think there are still many perspectives that means it's difficult to identify any kind of industry standard right now, from a benchmarking perspective. So, hang in there, continue the conversations, work with your peers, use industry groups like your own organization or SWPP to continue the conversations and see what other people are doing and what you might learn from it, and help you set some priorities. And then the second thing I would offer is be ready for some change of paradigm. Be-
It's
because
coming.
we introduced this concept of TTI and activity-based workforce planning. For some of our traditional contact center focused WFM practitioners, that's a pretty significant change of mindset to think about things not in terms of just widgets, but work effort. It's been a bit of a challenge to help them through that transition. So, and I think we're going to see, continued shifts and old ways of looking at things, because we've got to think about things differently. If we're going to truly create an environment where you can interweave work and drive more efficiencies, we're going to have to rethink data and then everything downstream from the data. So be open and ready for some changes in old ways of doing things, and manage the change. No one likes change. I've been around long enough to know that. But if you manage it, you communicate it, you create the context and an understanding of why you're moving down these paths, people will come along for the journey because they'll start seeing the benefits of it.
Thank you so much, Nathan, for joining us today. Pleasure having you. I hope everyone now is more prepared for this journey and start planning the world between the contact center and the back office for efficiency.
Yeah.
And once again, thank you so much.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. It's good to chat with you.
Thank you.
This episode was sponsored by NICE, leading customer experience platform.